Chapter 152. He only knew that this woman was very similar to her. Her every move, her tone of speech, her demeanor, and her usual hobbies. Sometimes, he would be in a trance for a moment, wondering if she was back. If it was really her, how could she suppress herself for so long and not come to find him? Not come to please him? Not get tired of lying in his arms, sometimes as gentle as water, sometimes as fierce as claws? When he heard Zhang Sun Wue mention that she was in the same room with the regent, his heart was torn. It was because of her betrayal a month ago. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. He saw that the emperor was the same as before. Every time he spoke halfway, he would shut up and stand alone in a daze. Gao Dazhong did not dare to look directly at the emperor. Occasionally, because of curiosity, he bravely raised his head to look at the absent-minded emperor. Only then did he see that his handsome face was sorrowful. There was infinite pain spreading in his dark eyes, like a helpless child. Your Majesty, it's time to eat. This servant will go, and let the imperial kitchen prepare. Gao Dazhong carefully looked at the emperor's face. Seeing that he waved his hand, he retreated with uneasiness. On the roof looking at the scene in the imperial study, Shen Yueji's heart was also a little melancholy. She thought that she and Feng Juqing had been husband and wife for 9 years. Even if it was just a play, she should have some place in his heart. He had never shown such a sad expression in front of her. It seemed that he had always only smiled to her, a gentle smile, a lingering smile, and a doting smile. Unexpectedly, her sighing appearance fell into the eyes of the man beside her. As early as when her eyes fell on Feng Juqing, she did not look away. The noble and extraordinary cold air erupted uncontrollably. The sense of existence he emitted was so strong that Shen Yueji could not ignore it. After getting along with him for a few days, she was gradually able to figure out the reason why Mo Wushang emitted cold air for no reason. She hurriedly raised her hands to prove her innocence. I say, you are too unreasonable, aren't you? Didn't you hear what the emperor said just now? His protection of this consort is only because of this consort's father. The man's cold and gloomy eyes were as cold as ice. When he heard her mention the emperor, deep hatred flashed in his eyes that was hard to detect. Shen Yueji caught it quickly, as if she had found something strange. Does the regent hate the emperor so much? No wonder. You two are men who use women. None of you are good. Shen Yueji, Ji Chu, who was hiding in the dark, was speechless. Shen Yueji pinched her thigh harshly to regain her composure and looked at Mo Wushang as though she had seen a ghost. Unfortunately, the man didn't realize that she was looking at him as if she had seen a ghost. His cold eyebrows twitched. Is what I said wrong? Shen Yueji smiled apologetically. Yes, what the regent said is wrong. Whatever the regent says is right. Mo Wushang's tightened thin lips slowly loosened because of the little woman's flattering words. The light in his eyes was not as sharp as before. After staying on the roof for a while, Shen Yueji could roughly understand why Feng Juqing liked to stay in the imperial study so much. It turned out that his most precious woman was hidden here. Chapter 153. Let's go back to Feng Qi Palace first. He said that he believed me on the surface, but it was only for the sake of his father. Maybe he is suspicious of me now. She poked the man's strong waist secretly. You took me so far away, and I stayed with you for so long. Now you should take some responsibility and send me back, right? Mo Wushang grabbed her little hand and said lightly, go after seeing the fireflies. Even if, as the regent said, there are fireflies in the imperial garden at night, you and I are in such a conspicuous place in the imperial garden. If we are seen for so long in the middle of the night, doesn't it confirm Zhang Sun Wuyue's words? Moreover, Zhang Sun Wuyue, this little bitch, dared to ignore her warning and ran to stir up trouble in front of Feng Juqing. If she was not with Mo Wushang, she would be open and above board, and she would not be afraid of the shadow. Naturally, she would not be afraid of him stirring up trouble and ruining her reputation. The point was, Shen Yueji glanced at the extraordinarily handsome man beside her. The key was that she was indeed fooling around with this guy. This time, Zhang Sun Wuyue had something on her. In the future, he would definitely pay more attention to her every move in Phoenix Perch Palace. She looked down on the power of the Zhangsun family, and Zhangsun Wuyue could not make any big waves under her eyes. Xin Yueji frowned. Even so, Zhangsun Wuyue was not a fuel-efficient lamp, so she had to guard against him. Since the emperor had asked her to deal with Zhangsun Wuyue herself, she didn't need to be sneaky. Xin Yueji's eyes moved to the elegant, handsome, and gentle man in white in the room. The next moment, her chin was suddenly raised. She met the man's eyes, which were full of killing intent again. Xin Yueji's heart trembled. Mo Wushang pursed his lips and stared at her closely. Look at me. Xin Yueji, His Majesty probably doesn't have the time to read the memorials now. With Zhangsun Wuyue's words before he left, Bin Gong is worried that His Majesty will leave for Fengqi Palace after the meal. I have to take advantage of this time to send me back first. The man's handsome face became colder and colder, and he clearly didn't want to let her go. Looking at his indifferent attitude, Xin Yueji was also anxious. The key was that she didn't dare to make too much noise on the roof, so as not to be heard by Feng Juqing. And so, the next round of competition began. Xin Yueji gritted her teeth and glared at Mo Wushang. In less than a moment, he averted his gaze and looked elsewhere. Xin Yueji forcefully pulled his handsome face back and gritted her teeth. Mo Wushang, don't push your luck. You play your game, and I'll play mine. We need to help each other, but if you go crazy in broad daylight, don't drag me down with you. Your Majesty, it's not good. Daoyang Palace is on fire. At this moment, a young eunuch stumbled all the way to the imperial study. His face was covered in dust, and his voice was hoarse as if he was about to cry. Xin Yueji stared at the embarrassed little eunuch for a while, seriously thinking about his words. Daoyang Palace was on fire? She almost subconsciously looked towards the handsome man in the imperial study, but this time, before her gaze could land on him, her chin was lifted by the man beside her again. The man's deep and serene black eyes were even more resplendent than the pearls and stones in the night. He won't go to your place tonight. These few words revealed the infinite joy of the master. Xin Yueji's little face was lifeless, and she looked at the man's naturally handsome face in a daze. After a long time. Chapter 154. The man raised his eyebrows and gave a non-committal response. The fury of the emperor could be heard from the room, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Xin Yueji had no time to care about anything else. Her eyes seemed to be spewing fire as she glared at Mo Wushang. He burned down the Daoyang Palace that he used to live in? Fuck. She hadn't lived here for a long time, but she still had feelings for it. Every time she was upset, she would look in the direction of Mink's Sun Palace, causing her upset to become even more angry and furious. She angrily grabbed the man's collar and lifted half of his body. Can't you tell me when you're going to burn me? If such a huge palace were to really burn up, wouldn't it cause sparks and smoke to fill the air? As she spoke, she looked towards the direction of the Mink Sun Palace. Logically speaking, when such a large palace burned, smoke should have shot into the sky. She turned to look at the man in confusion. Mo Wushang wrapped his arms around her slender waist and looked in the direction of Daoyang Palace with her. I only burned some things that she didn't like. Something you don't like? Xin Yueji frowned. Seeing that the man was deliberately keeping her in suspense, she knew that she wouldn't be able to get anything out of him. Don't tell me you intend to sit on the roof of the imperial study with me until nightfall? If you're sleepy, lean against my chest and sleep. Xin Yueji, Daoyang Palace. The moment he heard that Daoyang Palace was on fire, Feng Juqing immediately rushed over. Along the way, he didn't even ride the dragon carriage. He rarely used his qinggong all the way to Daoyang Palace. When he heard that the Daoyang Palace was on fire, he didn't think of anything else. There was only this place. This was the place where they had stayed before, and there were only the two of them. If even this place was reduced to ashes, he dared not imagine. The fire in Daoyang Palace wasn't big, and when he arrived, there were already many eunuchs and palace maids who had started to put out the fire. Fortunately, it was only a side hall that was on fire. Everyone scrambled to put out the fire. Because of the incident from the last time, so long as the slightest mishap occurred in Daoyang Palace, it would quickly alarm Feng Juqing. Your Majesty, didn't you bestow that golden fan to the late Empress? Gao Dazhong's sharp eyes saw that the dazzling golden fan was slowly being devoured by the raging flames. Something cracked open in the man's pitch-black eyes. He quickly walked forward. The golden fan was surrounded by layers of fire, and the surrounding area was burning. Other than that, in the middle of the fierce fire, there were many things that he was familiar with. He recognized every single one of them. He still remembered that when he gave these things to her, she was filled with joy and carefully treasured them, not even willing to use them. Regarding this, he had even teased her about it. It was just an object. If it was broken, it would no longer be beautiful, so he would just replace it with a better one for her. She would always smile and say that these things were all given to her by him and that she would treasure them well. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The servants of Diaoyang Palace jumped in fright. Gao Dazhong also suddenly knelt on the ground, not daring to look directly at the emperor's bloody hand. His tightly clenched fist was dyed red with blood. On the stone pillars of Diaoyang Palace, there was a circle of red blood, looking glaring and frightening. Your Majesty, someone must have deliberately set the palace on fire. This servant will immediately order people to investigate. Your Majesty, be careful of your dragon body. Chapter 155. Feng Juqing looked at the treasures that were spread by the fire. No matter how rare the treasures were, they couldn't escape the burning of the fire and were soon burned to ashes. He pushed Gao Dazhong away, ignoring the stinging pain in his injured hand, and walked into the main hall alone with a sense of loss. There was a throbbing pain in his heart, far more than the pain in his hand. He gently touched his chest with one hand, and his handsome face became even paler. Was he really wrong? Gao Dazhong watched him go in. There was no fire in the main hall, only a side hall. He ordered the busy eunuchs and palace maids to quickly put out the fire, and he waited outside Diaoyang Palace, waiting for the emperor to come out. He shook his head. Since the death of the late empress, he had seen the emperor's performance these days. He didn't believe that the emperor was heartless to the late empress. He clearly had feelings. Gao Dazhong shook his head. Diaoyang Palace just had so many incidents yesterday, and now it was suddenly on fire. It seemed that it couldn't be hidden even if he wanted to. Even so, he looked at the frightened and busy servants. As servants of the palace, I won't say too much. For today's matter, watch your mouths. If you dare to speak nonsense, I will cut off your heads. Yes. Eunuch Gao, rest assured. We won't talk nonsense. Phoenix Perch Palace. Seeing the figure of her concubine from afar, Shuangshi quickly went to greet her. Concubine Moon is here. Hearing the news of Zhangsun Wuyue's arrival, Shen Yueji's face didn't show much surprise, as if she had already expected it. She didn't get any benefits from Feng Juqing, and instead made the emperor annoyed. She wouldn't give up, and would definitely come to confirm with her own eyes whether a Mo Wushang was here or not. So be it. Look at your expression. What are you worried about? Shuangshi's little face was sad, and she looked at her anxiously. Concubine, logically speaking, I have nothing to be afraid of when Concubine Moon is here. What is scary is, she looked around, and then whispered in Shen Yueji's ear, the regent is here too. Shen Yueji? What? Shen Yueji's mouth twitched, thinking that she had misheard. Her expression must have been very stiff. On the way back, she deliberately asked Mo Wushang to put her in a remote corner. When the time came, she would come back by herself, so as to avoid being seen by others. Secondly, it was to prevent Zhangsun Wuyue from coming to her Phoenix Perch Palace and being seen by her. This Mo Wushang. Put him down? I'm back? Shuangshi had a mournful expression on his face. The Prince Regent is lying on the chaise longue. As soon as Imperial Concubine Moon came in, she saw the Prince Regent. This servant gathered my courage and asked the Prince Regent to leave. After all, the person who came was Imperial Concubine Moon. The Prince Regent doesn't matter, but this concerns your reputation. And then? The Prince Regent was originally lying on the Imperial Concubine's bed, but after hearing this servant's words, he got up and lay down on the Imperial Concubine's chair. When Imperial Concubine Moon came in, the first person she saw was the Prince Regent. Shen Yueji. He rubbed his aching eyebrows for a long time and pushed her crying face away from his eyes. Go in. Your Highness, Shuangshi was hesitant. Imperial concubine Moon must have gone to the Emperor to complain about you. Because of the previous Empress's matter, the Emperor's biggest taboo now is who made him a cuckold. Chapter 156. His Majesty knows? Naturally. Then does His Majesty believe it? His Majesty means to let me deal with this matter on my own. As for this Zhang Sun Wuyue, I remember reminding her once, but I didn't expect her to turn a deaf ear to my words. This Zhang Sun Wuyue sees that Your Highness is living too well, and feels that she is better than Your Highness in every aspect, but you are always a head above her. This is the result of her jealousy. Since His Majesty favors Your Highness, you don't need to take into account the past. You must teach this Zhang Sun Wuyue a good lesson, otherwise, she will always think that Your Highness is easy to bully, and will always ride on Your Highness's head. Today, when I came to visit Imperial concubine Jiejia, I vaguely saw a man whose figure looked like the Prince Regent. I thought I was mistaken, but today, it seems that I wasn't mistaken. It is indeed the Prince Regent. Inside the main hall, Zhang Sun Wuyue nervously peeked at that handsome and tall man. He was half reclining on the chaise longue. His peerless appearance, exquisite facial features, and flawless lips were painted. Every part of him was breathtakingly beautiful. The aura around him was like frost, revealing layers of chill. Just leaning there made people unable to take their eyes off him. After all, he was a man whom she had fallen in love with at first sight. Even after entering the palace, Zhang Sun Wuyue had never forgotten him in the depths of her heart. She knew that he hated Xin Yueji, but she didn't expect that after Xin Yueji entered the palace, his attitude towards her had changed so quickly. Her long nails sank into her flesh, and Zhang Sun Wuyue's hatred and jealousy towards Xin Yueji deepened. Why is it that she is inferior to me in everything, but everything is better than me? Now, even this man who was like a celestial being was looking at her in a different light. Imo Wushang closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep, as if he couldn't hear her words. Zhang Sun Wuyue didn't give up. She was still sitting on the round chair, but when she saw that he didn't move, she couldn't help but bravely step forward. Suppressing the throbbing in her heart, she walked to the tea table, poured him a cup of tea, and personally handed it to him. But when she was still an arm's length away from the man, that pair of dark and cold eyes suddenly opened. Zhang Sun Wuyue's hand trembled, and the tea in his hand spilled out uncontrollably. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The man didn't move, but the tea in her hand splashed towards his face. His face was drenched from head to toe. Her meticulous makeup today was instantly drenched by the water. She looked extremely flustered. Zhang Sun Wuyue screamed, covering his face with makeup and retreating several steps. Prince Regent. From the beginning to the end, the man didn't even look at her. His eyes that were pretending to sleep matched with his peerlessly handsome face. He was like a statue. Oh, what did I see in my own bedroom? A mocking voice came from behind him. Zhang Sun Wuyue's slender back immediately stiffened. The mocking voice continued, "You ran to the emperor and said that this empress had an affair with the Prince Regent, and said that this empress was a lowly person. How long has it been? You're already so considerate to pour tea for the regent and send him off?" Every time Xin Yueji said a word, Zhang Sun Wuyue's face would become whiter, especially when she heard the words "send him off" and "pour him tea." Chapter 157. Xin Yueji's bright and beautiful face could move people, and it was not difficult to see the sarcasm and ridicule in her bright eyes. She suddenly felt that she was in a difficult position. His heart was filled with panic and fear, and he knelt down with a thud. This concubine doesn't know what Imperial concubine Jiejia is talking about. When did this concubine tell His Majesty that Imperial concubine Jiejia had an affair with the regent? Why didn't this concubine? She slapped him in the face. Zhang Sun Wuyue covered her face and glared at Shuangshi angrily. She was frightened, but she was still strong and calm on the surface. The panic in her eyes betrayed her mood at the moment. How did Xin Yueji know what she had said to the emperor? The emperor loves me so much. As early as when you were driven out of the imperial study, he had already ordered eunuch Gao to tell me the whole story. He also specifically allowed me to deal with you at will. This is a private matter between me and Imperial concubine Jejia. Shin Yueji walked past her and went in front of Imo Wushang. She was going to find a round chair to sit down first, but she glanced at the handsome man on the Imperial concubine chair. She smiled and fell into the man's arms. Imo Wushang took advantage of the situation and hugged her. His eyes, which had been pretending to sleep, opened, and his cold and inhuman aura gradually dissipated with the beauty in his arms. It was not difficult to see a layer of warmth on his cold and peerless handsome face. He gently held Shin Yueji in his arms, slightly straightened his body, and adjusted his sitting position so that she could sit comfortably in his arms. Her slightly red and swollen little hand stroked the man's handsome face. Looking at Zhangsun Wuyue's wide eyes, she proudly said, "Imperial concubine Jejia didn't see wrong. This concubine is two-timing and has an affair with the regent. Imperial concubine Jejia, do you want to go to the imperial study again and call the emperor? Let him see it with his own eyes?" Zhangsun Wuyue's face alternated between green and white. He looked incredulously at Shin Yueji nestled in the arms of that extraordinary handsome man. The indifference of the past had been smoothed out, and on his handsome face was a kind of strange doting and care. She didn't know the regent like this. He was cold, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. He didn't get close to women and hated women to the extreme. But now, how could this be? Didn't the regent hate Shin Yueji the most? Since when did the two of them get together? Since when did he become so protective of her? When she got close to him just now, she could feel the strong killing intent from his body. Shin Yueji was already sitting in his embrace, but not only did he not push her away, he hugged her even tighter. If it was really as he guessed, that Imo Wushang had feelings for Shin Yueji, Zhangsun Wuyue didn't dare to think about it anymore. Chapter 157. Shin Yueji's bright and beautiful face could move people, and it was not difficult to see the sarcasm and ridicule in her bright eyes. She suddenly felt that she was in a difficult position. His heart was filled with panic and fear, and he knelt down with a thud. This concubine doesn't know what Imperial concubine Jejia is talking about. When did this concubine tell His Majesty that Imperial concubine Jejia had an affair with the regent? Why didn't this concubine? Pa! She slapped him in the face. Zhangsun Wuyue covered her face and glared at Shuangshi angrily. She was frightened, but she was still strong and calm on the surface. The panic in her eyes betrayed her mood at the moment. How did Shin Yueji know what she had said to the emperor? The emperor loves me so much. As early as when you were driven out of the imperial study, he had already ordered eunuch Gao to tell me the whole story. He also specifically allowed me to deal with you at will. This is a private matter between me and Imperial concubine Jejia. Shin Yueji walked past her and went in front of Imo Wushang. She was going to find a round chair to sit down first, but she glanced at the handsome man on the Imperial concubine chair. She smiled and fell into the man's arms. Imo Wushang took advantage of the situation and hugged her. His eyes, which had been pretending to sleep, opened, and his cold and inhuman aura gradually dissipated with the beauty in his arms. It was not difficult to see a layer of warmth on his cold and peerless handsome face. He gently held Shin Yueji in his arms, slightly straightened his body, and adjusted his sitting position so that she could sit comfortably in his arms. Her slightly red and swollen little hand stroked the man's handsome face. Looking at Zhangsun Wuyue's wide eyes, she proudly said, "Imperial concubine Jejia didn't see wrong. This concubine is two-timing and has an affair with the regent. Imperial concubine Jejia, do you want to go to the imperial study again and call the emperor? Let him see it with his own eyes?" Zhangsun Wuyue's face alternated between green and white. He looked incredulously at Shin Yueji nestled in the arms of that extraordinary handsome man. The indifference of the past had been smoothed out, and on his handsome face was a kind of strange doting and care. She didn't know the regent like this. He was cold, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. He didn't get close to women and hated women to the extreme. But now, how could this be? Didn't the regent hate Shin Yueji the most? Since when did the two of them get together? Since when did he become so protective of her? When she got close to him just now, she could feel the strong killing intent from his body. Shin Yueji was already sitting in his embrace, but not only did he not push her away, he hugged her even tighter. If it was really as he guessed, that Imo Wushang had feelings for Shan Yueji, Zhang Sun Wuye didn't dare to think about it anymore. Chapter 157. Shin Yueji's bright and beautiful face could move people, and it was not difficult to see the sarcasm and ridicule in her bright eyes. She suddenly felt that she was in a difficult position. His heart was filled with panic and fear, and he knelt down with a thud. This concubine doesn't know what imperial concubine Jiejia is talking about. When did this concubine tell His Majesty that imperial concubine Jiejia had an affair with the regent? Why didn't this concubine? Pa, she slapped him in the face. Zhang Sun Wuyue covered her face and glared at Shuang Shi angrily. She was frightened, but she was still strong and calm on the surface. The panic in her eyes betrayed her mood at the moment. How did Shin Yueji know what she had said to the emperor? The emperor loves me so much. As early as when you were driven out of the imperial study, he had already ordered eunuch Gao to tell me the whole story. He also specifically allowed me to deal with you at will. This is a private matter between me and imperial concubine Jiejia. Shin Yueji walked past her and went in front of Imo Wushang. She was going to find a round chair to sit down first, but she glanced at the handsome man on the imperial concubine chair. She smiled and fell into the man's arms. Imo Wushang took advantage of the situation and hugged her. His eyes, which had been pretending to sleep, opened, and his cold and inhuman aura gradually dissipated with the beauty in his arms. It was not difficult to see a layer of warmth on his cold and peerless handsome face. He gently held Shin Yueji in his arms, slightly straightened his body, and adjusted his sitting position so that she could sit comfortably in his arms. Her slightly red and swollen little hand stroked the man's handsome face. Looking at Zhang Sun Wuyue's wide eyes, she proudly said, Imperial concubine Jiejia didn't see wrong. This concubine is two-timing and has an affair with the regent. Imperial concubine Jiejia, do you want to go to the imperial study again and call the emperor? Let him see it with his own eyes? Zhang Sun Wuyue's face alternated between green and white. He looked incredulously at Shin Yueji nestled in the arms of that extraordinary handsome man. The indifference of the past had been smoothed out, and on his handsome face was a kind of strange doting and care. She didn't know the regent like this. He was cold, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. He didn't get close to women and hated women to the extreme. But now, how could this be? Didn't the regent hate Shin Yueji the most? Since when did the two of them get together? Since when did he become so protective of her? When she got close to him just now, she could feel the strong killing intent from his body. Shin Yueji was already sitting in his embrace, but not only did he not push her away, he hugged her even tighter. If it was really as he guessed, that Imo Wushang had feelings for Shan Yueji, Zhang Sun Wuye didn't dare to think about it anymore. If Imo Wushang really decided to kill Zhang Sun Wuyue for her, wouldn't that prove to Feng Jiuqing that she had an affair with him? She secretly wiped away the cold sweat on her forehead. This is a private matter between me and Imperial Concubine Moon. There is no need for the regent to worry about it. Besides, she smiled considerately, Lord Zhangsun is also an old minister in the court. If the regent kills Imperial Concubine Moon without saying a word, I'm afraid it will implicate the regent and leave a bad reputation. The man gently held her chin, his fingertips rubbing it gently. Chapter 159. Imo Wushang's eyes darkened, and he quietly let go of her. Instead, he hugged her in his arms. For you, my reputation is nothing. She was just deliberately trying to annoy Zhang Sun Wuyue. Shin Yueji didn't expect that this guy would make it real. Unable to struggle out of his arms, Shin Yueji became well-behaved. She glanced at the pitiful woman who was crying with jealousy in her eyes. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows with a headache. Did Imperial Concubine Moon forget that when you left my Phoenix Palace last time, you promised me again and again that you would never cause trouble for me again? Your concubine. I gave you a chance because you were just a pawn of the family, so I didn't want to lower myself to your level. But how did Imperial Concubine Moon repay me? I am not a good person. You have caused trouble twice. If I let you go because of soft-heartedness, not only will I worry about whether I will be framed by you again in the future, but I can't stop the mouths of the concubines in the harem. They will think that I am easy to bully, and then they will come to find trouble with me one after another. Third, I did have an affair with the Prince Regent. At this moment, my heart is empty, and you are the only one who knows the truth. It is reasonable to say that I should do as the Prince Regent said and kill you directly. Seeing Zhang Sun Wuyue's face change, she turned and smiled. If I kill you, I will not be able to explain to the Emperor, and Father will not be able to get in touch with Lord Zhangsun. How about this? Xin Yueji pinched a piece of pastry and slowly put it into her mouth. Xin Yueji scrutinized her for a while and said, "Since you can't control your mouth and still don't learn your lesson, I will cut off your tongue. In this way, you won't be able to open your mouth and speak in the future. This kind of mistake will not be repeated." Hearing this, Zhang Sun Wuyue only felt that her sight was black. Trembling, she looked at her with uncertainty. What did you say? You want to cut off my tongue?" If her tongue was cut off, she would be a mute and would not be able to speak in the future. She had tried her best to gain the favor of the Emperor. If she lost her tongue, what was the difference between her and entering the cold palace? Seeing her like this, Xin Yueji thought that she didn't say it clearly enough. She blinked and said with a naive and considerate face, "Was I too reserved? It shouldn't be." She had a puzzled look on her face. "I remember that I've been straightforward enough." Zhang Sun Wuyue was frightened as if cold water had been poured over him, and he powerlessly fell to the ground. Her body shivering, she knelt on the ground and stammered, "Guofei Nyang Yang. This concubine believes that you will not treat this concubine like this. Before we entered the palace, we were like sisters. Have you forgotten all of this? I remember it from beginning to end. I haven't forgotten a single thing. This concubine really knows her mistake. I beg Imperial Concubine Jiejie to give this concubine another chance. This concubine swears that in the future, this concubine will never dare to do it again." Sister Imperial Consort, Zhang Sun Wuyue wanted to crawl towards her. Double Happiness stood in front of her at the right time. Chapter 160. This time, Zhang Sun Wuyue was truly afraid. She didn't see the slightest bit of intimidation in Xian Yueji's eyes. She wanted to cut off her tongue. She wanted to destroy her. It was the Emperor who personally ordered her to deal with her. No matter how she dealt with her, the Emperor's name would not threaten her. She didn't know when the woman who was once stupid enough to be used as a gun by her had completely changed. Only now did she realize that her every move was being seen by Xin Yueji. Not to mention that Xin Yueji wanted to deliberately run to the Emperor to frame her. Even if Xin Yueji really had an affair with the regent, she couldn't do anything to her. She now realized that the gap between them was so big. Once Xin Yueji shed all pretense of cordiality with her, it would be easy to get rid of her. There was no need to go through so much trouble. Thinking of this, Zhang Sun Wuyue became even more afraid. Without her tongue, she wouldn't be able to speak in the future. Don't talk about being favored. There was no man in the world who would favor a mute, especially the Emperor who had a harem of 3,000 beauties and countless beauties. Zhang Sun Wuyue trembled, her eyes filled with sorrow. Xin Yueji saw her crying like a pear blossom in the rain, her charming little face looking very pitiful. It would be a pity to cut off such a beauty's tongue. But if she didn't, she raised an eyebrow. It would be difficult to dispel the anger in her heart. Letting her go once was because she was soft-hearted, but she didn't know the difference in severity. She was blind and couldn't see who she could offend and who she couldn't. She couldn't be blamed. She waved her hand. Seeing this, Double Happiness immediately stepped forward. "Your Highness, Imperial Concubine Moon, don't cry anymore. This concubine discovered that your eyes are quite beautiful. Compared to your tongue, tell me, which is more precious, your eyes or your tongue?" Without her tongue, she just couldn't speak. If she didn't have her eyes, she wouldn't be able to see anything in this world. She would be blind. Zhang Sun Wuyue's complexion changed. Double Happiness didn't give her a chance to beg for mercy again. She called someone in and dragged her out. Zhang Sun Wuyue's pitiful begging voice became more and more distant. Finally, she fell silent. Double Happiness must have thought she was too noisy and stuffed her mouth. Xin Yueji pinched a piece of pastry and slowly put it into her mouth. She glanced at the man behind her and pinched a piece for him. The Prince Regent is really an idle person. You're usually so busy that you can't even see your shadow. But now, you're casually entering my Phoenix Perch Palace in broad daylight. Those who don't know better would think that you're a vagabond who doesn't care about worldly affairs and only knows how to seek pleasure with women. The man raised his eyebrows, enjoying her analogy very much. She got up from his embrace, and this time, the man didn't restrain her. Shin Yueji scanned him from head to toe. I'll go take a look outside. Then, without giving him a chance to reply, she stroked the hem of her skirt and walked out. Zhang Sun Wuyue was pressed to the ground by two strong eunuchs. Her exquisite makeup, silk and satin were dirty and messy. Her tears ruined her makeup, and her tightly closed mouth swayed left and right. Once a eunuch's hand touched her mouth, she struggled fiercely like a hot potato. Seeing her come out, hope reignited in Zhang Sun Wuyue's frightened eyes, and he shouted at her, completely disregarding his status. Chapter 161. Seeing her come out, Shuangshi hurriedly moved a soft mattress for her. Shin Yueji leaned on the soft mattress, her eyes relaxed as she glanced at her embarrassed face. Zhang Sun Wuyue ignored the suppression of the two eunuchs beside her, struggled to break free from them, and crawled towards her step by step. Ji-er, you can't forget our friendship in the past. You used to call me big sister, and you always asked for my opinion before doing anything. Even your best things, you couldn't bear to use them and gave them all to me. I have always carefully treasured the things you gave me, and I was reluctant to use them. Do you know? I treasure them more than my life, because they were all given by you, Ji-er. As the eldest daughter of the Zhang Sun family's first wife, in the eyes of outsiders, I am glorious and enviable, but only you know that I have always been my father's chess piece, the Zhang Sun family's chess piece. It is only because I am beautiful and can speak that my father values me so much. Zhang Sun Wuyue threw herself at her feet, grabbed her skirt, and burst into tears. They make friends with me because I am the eldest daughter of the Zhang Sun family and I can bring them benefits. They flatter me on the surface, but they don't know how to make fun of me in their hearts. Even if I am the eldest daughter of the Zhang Sun family, what can I do? In the future, I will be sent to the palace and married to the old emperor. I won't be proud for long. Only Ji-er, you don't despise me. Only you are willing to make friends with me sincerely and treat me well without any return. I also sincerely regard you as my sister. Ji-er, now I finally have my own way out. I am still young, and I don't want to be ruined like this. I beg you, spare me this time. I beg you, believe me, I swear. I will never go against you again. Ji-er, for the sake of our many years of sisterhood, spare me this time. The girl's face was full of tears, her delicate face miserable, and her voice sorrowful. She pulled her skirt and bowed her head like a dog. Shin Yueji gently smiled, and her fingers gently pinched her delicate chin. This face no longer covered up the hatred and disdain, but was full of sincerity and pleading. But these eyes, her fingertip gently brushed across her eyelids. This flash of hatred still couldn't escape her sight. Imperial concubine Moon, how could there be so many chances? She gently opened her mouth and brushed her skirt, causing her to fall to the ground. Who would have a chance in the harem? A place that eats people up without spitting out their bones. He had given him a chance today, but in the future, he would be the one to die. You know this yourself, so why are you pleading with me? Since you have the guts to do it, you must have the courage to bear the consequences. I didn't come out to listen to you beg for mercy. Instead, I want to see with my own eyes whether this beautiful face with tears streaming down her face, when her tongue is cut, is stunning or frightening. She bent down and whispered in her ear. You? It seemed that he didn't expect her to be so heartless. Zhang Sun Wuyue stared at her in horror. Was this the Shin Yueji she knew? I'm just giving you a long memory. If there's a next time, this empress has taken a liking to your eyes. Every time you offend this empress, as long as this empress doesn't die, this empress will take back all the things you have one by one until you die. How about it? Chapter 162. The words that came out of her mouth were enough to destroy the world. Her tone was so gentle, but it made her feel cold all over, as if ice was spreading all over her body. Her blood froze, and there was no temperature. She pulled her up from the ground and threw her to the two eunuchs behind him. What are you doing? You can't even suppress a woman? Be quick. It's time for dinner. Don't disturb her ladyship's meal. Yes, yes. The two eunuchs bowed again and again. Shun Yueji. You can't do this to me. You can't do this to me. You will suffer retribution. Zhang Sun Wuyue was powerlessly pressed under the body and kept struggling. The two eunuchs pressed her very tightly. Her breath was wandering, and the extent of her struggle gradually weakened. Only a hysterical scream remained. Shin Yueji, you can't do this to me. Don't cut my tongue. Don't. Ah! A shrill scream pierced the sky. Zhang Sun Wuyue only felt that her vision was black. The numbing pain from her mouth made her want to faint. Mouthfuls of blood gushed out of her mouth. She lay on the ground uncontrollably, unable to stop the glaring blood from pouring out of her mouth like a rainstorm. Her mouth was red, and even the red sea of blood on the ground was dyed red by her. In the sea of blood, a piece of red flesh lay quietly. Her trembling hand slowly touched her empty lips. Cutting her tongue was very simple. She just had to suppress her, force her mouth open, and put the knife into her mouth. Zhang Sun Wuyue's whole body trembled uncontrollably, and the severe pain quickly spread to her nerves. She was in so much pain that she couldn't speak. She could only look at the piece of flesh lying quietly in the red sea of blood. She trembled all over, holding her head. Her clothes were dyed red with blood, and her messy hair was also stained with a lot of blood. Her whole body stank. Ah! She opened her mouth wide, trying to make a sound. Her wide-open mouth was empty, and there was only a mouthful of blood flowing out. She wanted to speak and forced herself to make a sound, but there was only a burst of a sound. She burst into tears and suddenly glared at Shun Yueji, who was not far away. Her pitch-black eyes were scarlet red, and a bone-piercing hatred and vengeance dyed her eyes red. They were even redder than the blood on the ground. Ah! She let out another strange cry and pounced towards Shun Yueji like a monster. Shin Yueji sat on the soft mattress and looked down at her in a condescending manner. Even when she transformed into a wolf and fiercely pounced towards her, she didn't even look at her. Shuangxi bluntly slapped her away. Compared to Shuangxi, who came from a family of generals, Zhang Sun Wuyue was just a weak woman. She was sent flying by one palm strike. Her whole body fell to the ground, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Finally, her eyes rolled back, and she completely fainted. You two, send Imperial Concubine Moon back, and have the servants of Endless Palace take good care of her. Tell them that this tongueless Imperial Concubine Moon is in a very weak state. If they aren't careful, they might not even be able to keep their life. Yes, yes, we will remember. This is good. Let's see if that little slut Zhang Sun Wuyue still knows how to learn from her mistakes. She doesn't even look at herself first, and yet she still dares to dream of fighting with the Imperial Concubine Moon. She simply overestimates herself. Shuangxi looked at the pool of blood on the ground with disdain. Then, she jumped in front of Shun Yueji and said, Imperial Concubine Moon, this servant will go to the Imperial kitchen and pick out some good dishes for you and the Regent. Chapter 163. When she returned to the main hall, she didn't see the man on the chaise longue. Shin Yueji was slightly surprised. He left? When she walked into the inner hall, she saw the man swaggering over her bed. When he heard her movement, he glanced at her with his dark eyes and didn't forget to move inconsiderately. Shin Yueji, looking at the man's posture, he didn't want to leave tonight. She walked towards the man and stared at him in a condescending manner for a while. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she asked, I want to know, what did you burn that the late Empress didn't like? She really didn't know what she didn't like when she was alive. Imo Wushang leaned on the edge of the bed. When he heard her question, his handsome face was as indifferent as the wind. He didn't say anything and didn't speak. Shin Yueji waited for a while and didn't get a response from him. She couldn't help but poke his strong waist with her hand. Are you going to say it? It's rare that I didn't drive you away, and even ordered Shuangxi to prepare food for you. You can't not even tell me this little thing that makes me curious, can you? Shun Yueji's whole body was pulled by him, and she fell into his arms uncontrollably. This kind of action became a habit after a long time. She didn't struggle. Instead, she subconsciously tightened her arms around his neck. Tell me, what did you burn? Some jewelry from when she was alive. Jewelry? Shun Yueji's eyes flickered, and she had some answers in her heart. All the jewelry she had when she was alive was given by Feng Jiuqing. She still remembered that when she received these treasures, she was overjoyed and careful. She couldn't bear to use them, afraid that they would be dirty and broken. Then she would be the one who would feel sorry. In the past, she treasured them as much as her life. Now, as Imo Wushang said, she didn't like them anymore. Even if he burned them in front of her, she just looked at it indifferently. This guy, looking at the man in front of her seriously, Shun Yueji suddenly smiled. In fact, only now did she realize that this man was not so hateful. There were still some redeeming qualities about him. Regent, since you are so free every day, how about doing something for me? Imo Wushang grabbed her restless little hand and played with it in his palm. Ignoring the scheming in her eyes, he actually felt that this little woman was extremely cute when she thought she was smart. He would rather she scheme against him more and pay less attention to that man. Speak. A few days ago, I asked Big Brother to help me with some matters in Zhengzhou, but he hasn't returned yet. Big Brother is always indecisive and can't keep things in mind. I'm a little worried that something might have gone wrong along the way. You want me to go to Zhengzhou on your behalf? Hearing his unkind tone, Shun Yueji waved her hand again and again. She hugged his arm and giggled. How can I be willing to let the regent leave me? The regent doesn't lack secret guards with high martial arts skills. You can just send 1 or 2 to Zhengzhou to investigate. Imo Wushang hugged her, his handsome brows slightly furrowed. I will let Ji Chu go. Don't. Ji Chu is your trusted secret guard. If you encounter any danger on your way back, he can protect you by staying by your side. Besides, it's not like my eldest brother doesn't know martial arts. He just hasn't come back yet. I'm a little worried that something might have happened to him, but I'm not worried about his life. The regent can just send 1 or 2 secret guards. Chapter 164. Shun Yueji covered her little mouth. She didn't know if she had cursed him for encountering some danger, and he understood her intentions. Prince Regent, actually I won't go back. Imo Wushang's dark eyes locked onto her. I won't go back in the future. Shun Yueji was speechless. Oh, that's true. If the Prince Regent wants to stay in the palace, no one can surpass the Prince Regent. After all, the Jiaoyang Palace is so big, the Prince Regent can stay as long as he wants. The man's handsome face darkened as he averted his gaze from her delicate face. The sky gradually darkened, and the two of them were silent for a long time. The man was still sitting in the same posture, his posture elegant and charming. Shun Yueji was different. Her posture wasn't very good, and she was forced into the man's arms. She thought that if she poked the man's sore spot, she would feel better and at least be able to escape from the man's arms. But it turned out, Shun Yueji was really thinking too much. Imo Wushang didn't seem to be paying attention to her, but he was constantly observing her every move until he heard a slight snore coming from his arms. He lowered his eyes slightly, and there was something rolling in his dark eyes. His plump fingertips caressed the woman's delicate white face. Then, his gaze landed on her pretty nose. Shun Yueji had a dream. In the dream, she fell into a pool that only reached her waist. She struggled in the pool and wanted to get out of the water. In the end, the water that only reached her waist suddenly rose and spread to the top of her head. She gulped down several mouthfuls of water and couldn't breathe. She kept struggling in the water, splashing and splashing, until she woke up from the suffocating dream. She opened her eyes and looked at the handsome face that had been magnified countless times in front of her. She was stunned for a moment. There was a delicate and cold thin lip on her lips. It was warm and soft, with a trace of coolness and a strong masculine scent. Her eyes widened in shock. Her delicate lips were ravaged by the man, bringing with it a tingling pain. She thought she was dreaming. This beast. She had a premonition that the man was going to pry open her lips and rush in. She suddenly opened her mouth and bit him hard. Hiss! The man sensed something and retreated. Shun Yueji covered her mouth and screamed in pain on the bed. Imo Wushang's face was filled with confusion. Finally, as if he had realized something, his handsome face darkened. He picked her up from the bed, locked her in his arms, and pried open her delicate little mouth. Fortunately, the little pink tongue did not suffer any injuries. There was only a stinging pain, and there were no visible scars. After a serious examination, the man's stern expression gradually improved. He gently caressed her little face, which was red from the pain. "What are you doing?" "Do what?" "Hee." Hearing these 3 words, Shin Yueji almost laughed out of anger. This damned beast. Every time she was asleep, he would do such despicable things to her, and he still asked her what she wanted. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and threw a punch at him. Imo Wushang calmly accepted it without dodging. Her punch was not light, and half of his handsome face immediately turned green and red. Jun Yan's lips twitched slightly, and the corners of his crimson lips twitched, carrying an indescribable grievance. "Why did you hit me?" Shin Yueji was so angry that her eyes turned red. She stared at him fiercely. "Do I need a reason to hit you?" he said in a low voice. "No need." Shin Yueji was so angry that her heart ached. This shameless man. Her slightly bulging breasts trembled. The man's dark eyes were filled with strong light, and they fell on her slightly rising and falling chest. "Does it hurt? I'll help you rub it." Chapter 165. Shin Yueji angrily slapped his big hand away. "Don't touch me." There was a "pa" sound. The back of the man's hand was also red. Looking at his half-red face and the back of his hand, Lin Mengya felt a little embarrassed. Shin Yueji's mouth twitched. Who was the man? Was this guy's skin so tender? At the same time, she took out a handkerchief and wiped the remaining warmth on the corner of her mouth. When the man's thin lips pressed against hers, she couldn't deny that her heart was pounding. Her movements were very heavy, and her delicate lips almost broke. The man saw it, and the darkness in his eyes pierced through. Seeing that the breath on the corner of her mouth was about to be wiped clean, Shin Yueji's wrist was grabbed by the man. She was shocked. "You?" Her lips were blocked again, and this time, the man kissed her even harder. His warm lips brushed past her thin lips, forcing her teeth open. Shin Yueji was about to struggle, but the back of her head was held by his big hand. Her resistance was slowly softened in his arms. Struggling in his arms, Shin Yueji grabs the man's collar and exerts a little force. His luxurious robe is torn by her. The man held her little hand, urging her to hug him back. His low voice swept across her earlobe, with a hint of provocation and ambiguity. "Don't rush, take your time." Shin Yueji. Damn. He cursed in his heart and wanted to spit out countless vulgarities. However, her lips were blocked by the man, and her closed teeth were useless after his repeated attacks. The man seemed to have given up, and he only tasted her lips slowly. This ambiguous position lasted for an unknown period of time. When Shin Yueji finally reacted, she was pressed under the man's body. His tall body wrapped around her small body, and her clothes were no longer as neat as before. She looked at him again. His loose robe fluttered, and his snow-white neck was crystal clear. Half of his neck was exposed, and half of it was pushed away by her hands, which seemed to be resisting and unwilling at the same time. This was a skin that was fairer than a woman's. Shin Yueji subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He subconsciously compared his body with Feng Juqing's. She had once helped Feng Juqing bathe, so she had seen every part of his body. His skin was as fair as a painting and as smooth as silk. Now that she compared the two of them, her vision was a little blurry and she actually felt inferior. Why were these two men so perfect? As a woman, she lowered her gaze and looked at her exposed neck. It was indeed fair, but why did she always feel that Imo Wushang's neck was prettier and more alluring than hers? Perhaps it was because her gaze was too intense. The man's cold, thin lips curled into a smile. He bent down a little, getting closer to her. "Jeer, you're the first one to look at my body." Bang! She flipped him over and pressed him under her body. The words that Imo Wushang was about to say were slapped back down by her. The corner of his mouth twitched, which was rare to see. Shin Yueji took advantage of the opportunity to pull his loose robe down to his waist. His smooth and thin waist was firm without any excess flesh. It was as white as a layer of snow, sparkling and translucent. Chapter 166. When she saw the man's perfect body, the fire in Shan Yueji's heart disappeared. If it was just a kiss in exchange for seeing Imo Wushang's naked body, it didn't seem to be a loss. After all, he was a big shot who held great power in the imperial court. He had the most envious identity and peerless beauty in the world. For Shin Yueji, who had lived twice, the rigid etiquette and rigid ladylike demeanor had long been thrown to the back of her mind. No matter how well she behaved, how well behaved she was, didn't she still end up like that? The original owner of this body was born in a family of generals, so she was more free and unrestrained. Shin Yueji caressed the man's delicate skin, and her sharp fingertips seemed to be able to draw blood. The man's dark eyes rolled and locked on the woman on top of him. His breathing was slightly heavy. When her little hand was about to slide down, he actually somewhat lost his composure and grabbed her hand, pushing her down from his body. His white forehead was densely covered with crystal beads of sweat. Imo Wushang found it extremely difficult to move now. Only God knew how hard it was for him to endure. On top of him was the woman he loved the most in his life. Her seemingly casual touch had long ignited his fire to the point where it couldn't be extinguished. At the same time, he enjoyed the feeling of being wantonly played by her, even if she was just a plaything. Imo Wushang's slender fingertips trembled slightly, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. This woman only cared about playing with fire, but didn't know how to extinguish it. Sitting on the edge of the bed with his back facing her, Shun Yueji could only see his straight back, with a slight tremble. As if she thought of something, her eyes flashed slyly, and she slowly wrapped her arms around his narrow waist from behind. Her white soft ears were slightly red, looking charming and beautiful. She leaned over and carefully breathed in his ear. "Prince Regent, what's wrong with you? Why is your body trembling so badly?" Like a snake, she hugged him from behind and entangled him. This was something he had never seen before. Bold, dazzling, seductive. Imo Wushang's dark eyes were rolling with thousands of waves. He suddenly closed his eyes and said in a hoarse voice that could be heard trembling, "I'm going to order someone to help you investigate Shun Yueji's matter." Hearing Shun Yueji's name, Shin Yueji instinctively let go of him. Although it was rare to see this man being humiliated, and she wanted to tease him for a while longer to vent the anger she had suffered from these few days, after all, this matter was related to Shin Yueji. For the sake of her brother, Shun Yueji could only suppress her pride. The little snake on his body finally retreated. Imo Wushang opened his eyes and calmed his throbbing heart. His body was reacting to her. He stood up, not even daring to look at her. Seeing his reaction, Shin Yueji covered her mouth and giggled. Her smile made the man's straight back stiffen even more. He wanted to turn back, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself when he saw her bright smiling face. "Be good and wait for me. I'll be back in a while." Without waiting for the woman to respond, the man leaned over and planted a cold kiss on Shun Yueji's blushing face. Shin Yueji was stunned. When she came back to her senses, there was no longer a man in the hall. She covered her face with her hand, and the remaining heat lingered for a long time. Shin Yueji wanted to scold him, but she didn't know what to say. Thinking of the man's cute face, she was afraid that if this was spread out, no one would believe that the cold and bloodthirsty Prince Regent of Feng Country, who had killed countless people, had a side that was even cuter than a child. Chapter 167. Master, you're back? At this moment in Diaoyang Palace, Ji Chu squatted at the entrance of the palace, drowsy. In a daze, he saw a tall figure in a black robe walking over. He shook his head fiercely. After confirming that it was his master, he hurriedly stood up and ran in front of him. "Master, why did you come back? Did His Majesty suddenly return to Fengqi Palace to catch them in the act?" The handsome man's face was as black as ink. He directly walked past him, ignoring him. Ji Chu looked puzzled and quickly followed. He didn't dare to talk nonsense anymore. "Master, His Majesty didn't return to Fengqi Palace. He went directly to the imperial study. When he learned that the jewelry he had bestowed to the former empress had all been burned, he seemed to have been drained of his soul. He didn't even sit on the dragon carriage and stumbled all the way to the imperial study. And Ji Chu's tone couldn't hide the gloating. His master usually loved to hear these words, especially when Feng Zhuqing lost his composure. But now, he found that his master seemed unwilling to listen. There was a bath in the side hall of Daoyang Palace. Because there was no one living in it, the cold water would automatically be changed every day. This servant of Daoyang Palace would never think of changing the hot water for the bath. Watching his master enter the side hall, Ji Chu followed all the way. Then, bang! Water splashed everywhere, and the ice-cold water froth caused him to shiver. His eyes widened as he looked at Imo Wushang, who had sunk himself into the ice water. "Master, are you still showing that your body isn't cold enough?" His whole body was bone-chilling, and cold sweat went straight to his heart. The restlessness in his body finally calmed down a little because of the bone-chilling cold. Imo Wushang's tense nerves slowly recovered. Regaining his rationality, he opened his deep eyes and glanced at the man on the shore with wide eyes. "Say it again." Ji Chu. The corner of Ji Chu's mouth twitched. Looking at his master's dignified appearance in the water, he repeated what he had just said. The man's dark eyes were tightly shut. His long, curly eyelashes were stained with sparkling water droplets. His smooth and delicate skin was peerlessly beautiful, like an immortal in a painting. After a long time, only then did the man slowly open his eyes and reply, "Go to Zhengzhou personally." Central Plains? Ji Chu was puzzled. Master sent this subordinate to Continent Center. "Is there something you need me to do?" Hearing this, Imo Wushang slowly closed his eyes again. After a long time, he lightly said, "The eldest young master of the Shan clan has gone to the central province and hasn't returned for several days. Ji is worried." Ji Chu. Then why did he have to go? He was his master's sweetheart. Asking him to go for such a small matter? There was no lack of embroidered uniformed secret guards with high martial arts skills behind master, so he could just casually send one. "Do you have any objections?" She could feel the endless resentment and dissatisfaction emanating from his body. Imo Wushang's cold eyes stared at him. Ji Chu was so frightened that he immediately straightened his body. "No objection, no objection. Since he is Imperial Concubine Shan's big brother, then he is one of us. This subordinate will immediately set off. I will spur the horse and rush to Zhengzhou as soon as possible." Chapter 168. His expression made Ji Chu feel like he had seen a ghost, with goosebumps all over his body. Why did his master look like he was in lovesickness? Stepping out of the hall and feeling the cold wind blowing on his face, Ji Chu secretly wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and enjoyed the gray moonlight. For the first time, he felt it was better to stand outside. At the same time, Shen Yueqi, who was far away in Jinzhou, was also enjoying the scenery with him. On the roof of the second floor of the inn, Shen Yueqi was wearing a crescent robe with a twisted, handsome face. He was holding a pile of dog's tail grass in his hand, pulling off their heads one by one, kneading them in his palm, flattening them, and then throwing them down from the roof as if to vent his anger. After venting, he threw away all the dog's tail grass in his hand. He flew down from the roof and picked up the dog's tail grass on the ground. Then he flew back to the roof and repeated his actions. He went back and forth at least 3 times. He looked up at the moon, which was round and bright. The moonlight shone on his body, lengthening his slender figure. His trembling hands touched the crooked shadow on the roof, with tears in his eyes. "I'll grow crooked if I don't see you any longer." After that, he stared at a door on the right with great sadness. A black light suddenly appeared, and countless sharp blades seemed to poke the door without leaving a hole. Women were delicate and troublesome. Women were troublesome. They couldn't compare with his little sister at all. She panted after 2 steps, vomited after 2 mouthfuls of food. Was she still a 16-year-old girl? Was she a white-haired old lady? Shen Yueqi sat alone on the roof and sighed. "I promised to bring her back in 3 days, but now it's been 4 days." My heart is aching. He wiped the tears in the corner of his eyes. Alas, I want to knock her out and carry her to the palace. Young Master Shun, young Master Shun. At this time, there was a hurried shout from downstairs. Hearing the anxious voice, Shen Yueqi's handsome face instantly darkened, and he looked down fiercely. What are you shouting for? Can't you let me miss the little baby in my heart? Xiao Yu was startled by the man's reprimand. Tears started to fall down. Seeing her cry, Shun Yueqi couldn't help it either. The tears he had just held back flowed down his handsome face. Xiao Yu, young Master Shen, what happened to you? Shun Yueqi jumped down from the roof and landed in front of her. She looked at the little maid's red face and sobbed. Tell me, what happened to your miss? My miss is not used to the food in Jinzhou. The soil and water in Jinzhou are not compatible with Zhongzhou. Miss wants to eat Zhongzhou's steamed buns. Please, young Master Shun, please send Miss back to Zhongzhou. When Miss is full, she will enter the palace with young Master Shun. Back to the Central Plains? Shun Yueqi almost laughed out of anger at her words. 3 days ago, your young miss was hungry, so this young master brought her back to Zhongzhou. After eating, we traveled day and night to Jinzhou. After that, in the middle of the night, she was hungry again, so this young master brought her back again. In these 3 days, we went back and forth at least 4 or 5 times. Shin Yueqi's handsome face turned cold. Chapter 169. The boss of Zhouji Bun Shop is the only one who cares about my Mississippi. He knows that my miss doesn't have enough to eat, so every time when the bun is ready, he will secretly leave 2 for my Mississippi. My miss is a kind-hearted person. Once she enters the palace, I'm afraid she won't be able to come back. She won't even be able to see the boss of the bun shop again. The only thing in her heart is that she wants to go back and see him a few more times. Young Master Shun, this servant dares to swear to the heavens that my miss has absolutely no intention of deliberately teasing you. Shun Yueqi listened and laughed. Your miss misses the boss of the bun shop, but this young master doesn't miss my little sister? If it weren't for my little sister's repeated reminders, this young master wouldn't be bothered to deal with you. Xiao Yu looked embarrassed. But this servant's miss hasn't eaten for nearly a day. If she doesn't return to Zhongzhou, this servant is afraid that her body will be weak, and she won't be able to enter the palace to see imperial concubine Yang. Hearing this, Shun Yueqi directly walked past her with a cold face. Xiao Yu didn't understand what he meant. Seeing him go to her miss's residence, she was shocked and quickly followed. Young Master Shun, my miss is still unmarried. This boudoir, you can't break in. Shun Yueqi was too lazy to pay attention to her. When she came over, he slapped her away. Can't break in? Why can't I break in? This young master has brought her here. You've been making things difficult for this young master along the way. This young master can't even break in a mere boudoir? Xiao Yu wanted to stop him again. Shun Yueqi didn't give her the chance. The door was kicked open with a bang. The beautiful face of the woman inside immediately came into view. Shun Yueqi had seen Li Yingying's appearance before. Just as Shun Yueqi said, she looked like the late empress. Her demeanor, tone, and the face were more than 70% similar. His vision was blurred for a moment. She just stood there without saying a word. If she wore the white clothes that Gu Yueqin loved to wear, it would definitely cause people to misunderstand that she was the late empress. Seeing Shun Yueqi staring at her miss, Xiao Yu rushed up and stood in front of Li Yingying. Young Master Shun, please behave. Shun Yueqi came back to his senses. His dazed, handsome face instantly became distorted and cold. I'll ask you one last time. Do you want to eat the food here? Tears welled up in Li Yingying's almond-shaped eyes. Hearing Shun Yueqi's threatening words, she turned her head to the side and didn't reply. Okay. Shun Yueqi was so angry that he laughed. He pointed at her and said, Fine. You should be glad that I never hit women. Young Master Shun, what are you trying to do? Although my Li family is only a small family and can't compare to your Shun family's power in Feng country, this is under the feet of the emperor. It's not a place for you to mess around. You. Shun Yueqi angrily slammed the door and left, leaving Xiao Yu and Li Yingying staring at each other in the room. They waited for about the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn. Shun Yueqi retraced his steps. Xiao Yu, who had just lowered her guard, immediately raised it again. She glared at him fiercely. Young Master Shun. She saw that he was carrying a package in his hand. As he entered the room, the familiar fragrance from the package immediately filled the room. Li Yingying's eyes were filled with joy as if she had already guessed what was in the package. Shun Yueqi threw the package towards Xiao Yu's arms. The bun was still steaming. Xiao Yu could feel it through a layer of cloth. Chapter 170. Before I came back from Zhongzhou, I specially ordered my subordinates to bring them here. This is to prevent you from using such an excuse to make me bring you back. These buns are enough for you to eat all the way to the capital. If you dare to cause trouble for me again. He snorted coldly. I will rush into the palace and ask for my little sister's opinion. I will deal with you when I come back. Xiao Yu was speechless. After dealing with the two eyesores, Shun Yueqi climbed up to the roof again. Holding her chin, she looked at the cold moon and sighed. Can you feel my longing for you? Now that I look at the cold moon, it looks so much like you. It is so round and cute. Phoenix Palace Achu. Your Highness, what's wrong? Did you catch a cold because of the cold? Double Happiness draped a cloak over her. Your Highness, it's late. Are you waiting for the regent or the emperor? Shun Yueqi sat on the chaise longue. After hearing Double Happiness's words, her hand that was holding the cloak paused. She rubbed her nose for a long time. Who was she waiting for? Feng Jiuqing would not come tonight, but Imo Wushang had said before he left that he would come back tonight. Suppressing some thoughts that she should not have, she rubbed her itchy nose. I won't catch a cold. It's warm in Phoenix Palace and I have never felt cold. Is someone scolding me behind my back? Otherwise, why would she sneeze all of a sudden? Double Happiness sighed. This servant heard from the elders in the residence that 1 is missing, 2 is scolding, and 3 is catching a cold. The person in the harem who can scold you the most is undoubtedly Imperial Concubine Moon, whose tongue was cut off by you today. But your Highness just sneezed, so it should be General, Madam, and Young Master. But according to this servant, it should be Young Master. Shun Yueqi turned to look at her. Are you so sure? Of course. Eldest Young Master once told this servant that a day without seeing your Highness is like an autumn. Eldest Young Master once whispered to this servant that if your Highness marries in the future, he will move into the son-in-law's residence. His room will be separated from your Highness's by a wall. When he misses your Highness, he can go through the wall. Shun Yueqi. So. Double Happiness replied with a straight face. Most likely, it's the Eldest Young Master. Eldest Young Master hasn't returned from the central province for so long. I don't know what he's thinking of your Highness. He's probably sitting on the roof of some tea house, gazing at the moon. This servant reckons that when he looks at the moon, he thinks it looks like your Highness. Hearing this, Shun Yueqi's mouth twitched as she looked at the cold moon outside the window. With some uncertainty, she asked, Does this pancake-sized moon look like me? Shuangshi thought about it seriously. The moon definitely doesn't look like your Highness, but your Highness, you can't stop Eldest Young Master from fantasizing. If Eldest Young Master fantasizes too much, not to mention the moon, even the grave will think that your Highness is buried in it. Shun Yueqi. Shuangshi poured her a cup of tea and mumbled, Nyang, don't underestimate Eldest Young Master. When Nyang was young, I went on a long journey with Foreign and didn't tell Eldest Young Master. When we returned, we saw Eldest Young Master hanging himself with a rope. The Empress was young at that time, so perhaps she doesn't remember. Chapter 171. After waiting for nearly an hour, Imo Wushang finally arrived. Double Happiness was about to change the pot of hot tea when she bumped into the man who was coming towards her. The man had already noticed it and moved aside. Double Happiness bumped into the pillar. She was about to curse when she saw the cold and familiar handsome face in front of her. She swallowed hard and quickly knelt on the ground to salute. Greetings, Regent. Imo Wushang glanced at her lightly. Is your master asleep? No. Double Happiness shook her head repeatedly. Her Highness has been waiting for Regent when she heard that you were coming back. If Regent didn't come, Her Highness didn't plan to sleep either. With these words, it could be seen that Imo Wushang's cold and aloof face had become more approachable. Double Happiness secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks to her wit, the man's voice was no longer as cold as before. Get up? Yes, yes, thank you, Regent. Regent, hurry up and go in. Don't let Her Highness wait for too long. I believe Her Highness will be very happy when she knows that Regent is here. After Imo Wushang came in, he saw the exquisite figure sitting on the beauty chair. The redness and swelling on her hand had disappeared a little, and the broken skin seemed to have grown new skin, which was very beautiful. He walked over silently. Perhaps Shin Yueji was thinking about things seriously. She didn't notice when he walked up to her, until a big hand fell on her shoulder. She reacted. The man lifted her up from the chair and sat her on his lap. Are you thinking about me? These 4 simple words made Shun Yueji's little face flush red with a whoosh. Just now, she was indeed thinking about him. No matter what, the person in her mind was indeed him. She wanted to deny it, but she met the man's gentle eyes. Shin Yueji moved her lips and found that he had changed his clothes during the time he was away. Even his hair was a little wet. It seemed that he came over without drying himself. There was even a small tuft of hair stuck to his handsome face, which added a kind of evil beauty to him. Shun Yueji stood up from his body and looked at his wet hair, which was still dripping water. You left for so long. Did you go to take a bath? With his legs empty, Imo Wushang's expression turned ugly. He casually scooped her into his arms and said in a huff, I'm going. Why don't you dry your hair first? The man's handsome face was extremely dark. Shin Yueji glanced at him. You're wet. You've made me wet. Imo Wushang left with a black face. He didn't even turn his head. Seeing him leaving so decisively, Shin Yueji couldn't help but run after him. Where are you going? I'll listen to you. Shin Yueji. He reacted to these 4 words. The corner of Shun Yueji's mouth twitched as she blocked his way. Seeing the man's unfriendly face, she scratched her head and said, Well, since you're here, you can wipe it here. You can't go back to Diaoyang Palace in the middle of the night. It's quite troublesome to go back and forth. Seeing the man's gloomy face relax a little, Shin Yueji took his hand and pulled him back. She found a soft towel from the inner hall and covered his head with it. She gently and considerately wiped his wet hair. The regent has been away for so long. Did you only go to take a bath? What do you want to ask? That is. Chapter 172. As smart as he was, how could he not understand the meaning of her words? Imo Wushang closed his eyes, and his deep black eyes were buried. The next moment, her hand was held by the man. She fell into the man's arms and was hugged by the man. Done. Shin Yueji smiled. I'm really worried about my brother. I'm afraid that there will be something wrong with him. Fortunately, there is the regent. The people around the regent are very efficient. As long as the regent is willing to help me, I will be relieved. The man's cold lips twitched with self-mockery. I will do what I promised you. I understand. The regent is a gentleman. How can he break his promise to a weak woman like me? Imo Wushang's plump fingertips gently pinched her red lips, and his eyes were dark. This posture was too ambiguous. Shin Yueji blushed and quickly got up from the man's arms. Regent, are you going to stay here tonight? She asked. Are you going to stay here tonight? Yi Shunga asked. Yes. Shin Yueji blushed. The regent wants to stay here, which is giving me face. But after all, I am a man and a woman alone with the regent. It is not safe for me to be in the same room. I have been in the palace for a few months, but I am still a virgin, so I want to make some rules with the regent. I won't touch you. These words made Shin Yueji want to laugh. Looking at the man's serious face, she had an illusion that she was measuring the heart of a gentleman with her own mean measure. She walked to the tea table, took a cup of tea, and placed it in the middle of the bed. In the end, she stuffed a pillow in the middle. This is the first condition. Imo Wushang glanced at her busy figure and didn't answer. His silence fell into Shun Yueji's eyes as acquiescence. The second condition, there is always a contingency. If the emperor suddenly comes back, the regent is good at martial arts and must be aware of it. I hope that the regent will leave first and not be discovered by the emperor. There was still silence. The third condition. Shin Yueji raised 3 fingers. I have compromised to this point, and I don't even care about my reputation, just to make the regent happy and agree to share a bed with me. Therefore, the third condition is very simple. The regent only needs to comply with the first 2 conditions. Seeing that the man didn't say anything, Shin Yueji finally realized that something was wrong. She walked up to him and stared at his dark eyes. Regent? Are you doubting my character? Shin Yueji. The man waved his robe, and Shin Yueji only felt a gust of cold wind blowing in front of her. Then, there was a crackling sound. It was the tea set and pillow she had just placed on the bed. They rolled on the ground, and the tea set broke into pieces. She narrowed her eyes, looked at the mess on the ground, and then glared at the man's enchanting face. Seeing the man glancing at her chest, Shin Yueji realized that something bad was going on. Shin Yueji hurriedly covered her chest. I won't do it. Then I'll change it. The first condition is not to hit my acupoints and not to touch me. Imo Wushang's beautiful brows frowned again. Don't touch the back. She gritted her teeth. Imo Wushang, don't push your luck. It's not easy to keep you here. Do you know how long I've been thinking about it? If the regent doesn't agree to my conditions, then continue to live in your Diaoyang palace. My Phoenix Palace can't afford to raise a big Buddha like you. Speak. You're so fierce. Chapter 173. Looking up at the beam, Shin Yueji helplessly looks at his aggrieved face. Regent, do you still know who you are? He looks away and no longer looks at her. In a few steps, Shin Yueji stared at him condescendingly for a while and said tentatively, Regent, are you short of women? Imo Wushang slowly raises his head, and his dark eyes fall on her delicate little face. I'm short of you. Her heart is beating wildly. It's almost jumping out of her throat. Shin Yueji reaches out and slowly caresses her pretty face. She doesn't need to think to know that her hot face must be red. She thought that after the incident with Feng Juqing, she would take this matter lightly. Even if she died, she would never have thought that Imo Wushang would appear. Feng Juqing would never say such sweet nothings to her. And Imo Wushang, a man who has been protecting her and loving her for so many years, she covers her lips awkwardly and coughs. She is about to say that she can find a woman for him, but she is forced back by his explicit words of love. She swallowed her saliva and realized that her mouth was dry. Ignoring him, she pours herself a cup of tea and swallows it. Imo Wushang had been watching her every move. When she finished her tea, he didn't forget to pour another cup for her. He hands the tea to her. Shin Yueji takes it and thanks him. She is about to drink it. I'm serious. She gulps down the tea. Shin Yueji doesn't look directly at the man's eyes. She tries to calm down. I know. Otherwise, why is she blushing? The man listens happily and pulls her into his arms. You can only lack me. Shin Yueji struggles in his arms awkwardly. Didn't you say that there are fireflies in the Imperial Garden tonight? Are you going to take me to see it? Answer me. No. There are so many good men in the world. For a fickle woman like me, if you want to pick, then pick the best. Hiss. He pinches her again. Shin Yueji glares at him angrily. From the very beginning, this man hated her so much that he wanted to kill her. However, in just 1 or 2 days, he changed so quickly. There must be some premeditated plan. She, Shin Yueji, was not a fool. Even if his words of love moved her heart, she was not an irrational person. There were flames dancing in the bottom of his dark eyes. Because of her denial, the flames gradually dimmed. Imo Wushang's lips curled into a sarcastic smile. His heart felt as though it was being pulled by someone. No matter how hard he tried, he never had a place in her heart. The only reason she was willing to be with him was because she could take advantage of him. Xian, Imo Wushang hugged her tightly, not allowing her to struggle, as his smooth and clean chin pressed against her restless little head. Do you know that there is no need for you to scheme against me? Even if you are using me, I will enjoy the process of being used by you. At least in your eyes, I will be there. The man didn't respond to her. Shin Yueji didn't give up and asked again, but he still ignored her. She had no choice but to go to bed. However, the moment she climbed up, she realized that he immediately got up and followed behind her. As she got on the bed, he followed her. Shin Yueji's back was facing him, and her ears were sensitive to his movements. Sure enough, as soon as the man got on the bed, he immediately reached out and pulled her into his arms. Shin Yueji's mouth twitched in his arms, listening to the man's strong heartbeat. "Hey, Imo Wushang, what are you doing?" Chapter 174. You said that you would take me to the Imperial Garden to see fireflies. You can't go back on your word. You don't have me in your heart. You taking me to the Imperial Garden to see fireflies and whether I have you in my heart or not are two different things. What conflict is there? Hearing the man's muffled voice, Shin Yueji couldn't help but mutter in his arms. Feeling the tightness of her waist, she knew that she had said the wrong thing again. You didn't like me first. I've liked you for so many years, but you've always been indifferent to me and almost killed me. I finally told you that I didn't like you anymore and entered the palace to be the emperor's woman. In the end, you suddenly appeared and said that you liked me. Tell me, aren't you very strange? That's not you. What's not me? Shun Yueji was shocked. The man's big hand wandered to her waist and said angrily, "If it's not me, then it's not me. I only like you." Shin Yueji grimaced in pain. Can't you remember that you're a man? Pinch me when you're angry. You're not a woman. Why are you learning from a woman? The man immediately let go of her. He gently rubbed her slender waist. How did you do the fireflies in the Imperial Garden? Didn't you spend so much effort to get the fireflies for me to see? If you don't take me to see them now, then everything you've worked hard to prepare will be in vain. Isn't it a pity? Sigh. He sighed with remorse. No matter how much Shun Yueji's lips rubbed, the man didn't let go. You win. Shun Yueji gritted her teeth in anger. She cursed his 18 generations of ancestors in her heart. This stingy man, whoever fell for him would have 8 lifetimes of bad luck. He was harder to coax than a woman. Damn. Sleep. Not long after, she heard a slight snoring coming from his arms. The man's dark eyes flickered. Ugh. Shin Yueji widened her eyes in horror and stared at the handsome face in front of her that had been magnified countless times. The sleepiness that she had gathered with great difficulty instantly dissipated. Her delicate lips were nibbled by the man, and the soft touch pressed against her lips. It was soft and numb, with endless lingering. Following the man's kiss, her waist was lifted by the man, and she pressed against the man's chest even more tightly. In the dark hall, an ambiguous atmosphere was spreading. She was stunned for a few seconds. Suddenly, she opened her mouth and bit the man's lips. A sharp pain assaulted him, but Imo Wushang only furrowed his brows. He gently nibbled on her delicate lips a few times before releasing her. Shin Yueji wiped her lips hard and stared at the fierce look in the man's eyes. She was so scared that her hand trembled. She quickly wiped her lips with the back of her hand. The fierceness in the man's eyes dissipated, and she was like a deflated ball. After about the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, something wasn't right. Imo Wushang was forcing himself on her. Why was she feeling guilty? When she sorted out her thoughts and looked at the man again, she caught a glimpse of the man's evasive eyes. She caught him red-handed. What did you say under the bed just now? Don't sleep. Shin Yueji was completely furious. Are you crazy? You won't take me to the Imperial Garden, and you won't let me sleep. What do you want? Coax me. Chapter 175. Shin Yueji stared at him as if she had seen a ghost. What's wrong with you? You don't have me in your heart. Just because of this? Imo Wushang's dark eyes locked onto her. Although he did not speak, his dark and expectant eyes silently responded to her. Yes, it was because of this. Shin Yu and Ji Yunshu even had the illusion that if you don't pacify me, I won't let you have a good night's sleep. In the face of his childish behavior, Shun Yueji was completely convinced. She patted his handsome face and said, Okay, I admit it. I have you in my heart. Okay? Perfunctory. Gritting her teeth, Shin Yueji straightened her face and looked at him with a serious expression. She squeezed out each word from between her teeth. Bin, gong, said, Bin, gong. Has you in my heart. Is this okay? Indifferent. She got off the bed angrily. Shin Yueji stared at the handsome man lying on the bed. His messy hair, messy clothes, and loose robe were unbuttoned, revealing his white and strong chest. She stomped her feet angrily. She picked up a teapot from the coffee table and smashed it towards the man's head. Seeing the hard teapot flying towards him, Imo Wushang did not dodge. He just looked at it coldly. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The hard teapot smashed into her head, and a large patch of red instantly appeared on her fair forehead. Faint traces of blood could be seen on her forehead. Shin Yueji thought he would dodge, so she did not hold back. At the moment when the teapot was about to hit him, Shin Yueji was shocked. If he did not dodge, she would be finished. Looking at the red mark on the man's forehead, Shin Yueji moved her lips and wanted to apologize. Hurt me. It was another simple, cold, and clear word. Shin Yueji swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She almost went crazy on the spot. How did she not know that Imo Wushang was such a difficult character? She struggled on the spot for a long time, so long that she took a deep breath, inhaled deeply, and finally, she walked to the front of the bed and bent over to look at the man's peerlessly handsome face. She held his face affectionately and tried to make herself smile affectionately. Prince Regent, I have you in my heart. The man's pitch-black eyes flickered, and there was a bottomless abyss in them. The dark vortex was tumbling violently, as if it wanted to suck her whole body in. Shin Yueji stared at the pair of eyes that were as black as the abyss. Ugh, her lips were sealed. Their soft lips were pressed against each other, and the familiar scent of the man spread into her nostrils. She had natural facial features and long, beautiful eyelashes. At such a close distance, his face was fair and flawless. His exquisite face was as delicate as a newborn baby's. Knowing that she would be angered, Imo Wushang did not go too deep. He stopped at just the right time on her tender lips and pulled her into his embrace. His low and hoarse voice whispered in her ear, Remember what you said. Shin Yueji was dizzy from his kiss. It was not until the man carried her out of Feng Qi Palace and they were in the air that she slowly came back to her senses. She lowered her head and looked down. Shuangshi had just brought 2 bowls of noodles from the imperial kitchen for her. She looked inside with her head lowered. When she found that they were not inside, she opened her mouth and muttered a few words. Then she sat on the ground, put the 2 bowls of noodles on the ground, and ate them by herself. Chapter 176. In the imperial garden, there was no shortage of rare and strange flowers and plants. The man carried her and sat down on the roof of a house not far away. Small fireflies emitting green light flew around the long path of the imperial garden, illuminating the colorful flowers and plants, making them even more beautiful. The long path was surrounded by many fireflies. Like lanterns hanging on the flowers and plants, they were neatly arranged in rows. Seeing this scene, Shin Yueji was shocked. She glanced at the man beside her. Fireflies lived on the mountains. Although there were many mountains in this imperial garden, they were all arranged according to the scenery. Even if there were fireflies, it would be a miracle. They lived in groups of 3 to 5, and there would not be as many as there were in front of her. There were at least tens of thousands of them, and they were connected together, illuminating everything in the imperial garden. This was the first time she had seen such a scene in her life. Feng Jiuqing was as gentle as water to her, but he would not be like Imo Wushang, who put in so much effort to make her happy. These fireflies seemed easy to catch. With his status, it was not difficult to catch them. However, they seemed to have been trained. They were arranged neatly in the imperial garden, and their numbers were the same. If it was easy to train an animal, then it was much more difficult to train these small fireflies. Her palms were tight, and there was a thin layer of sweat. She was not a heartless person. Even if she had lived twice, her heart was still beating, and she still had feelings. Feng Jiuqing seemed to be gentle and affectionate on the surface, but he would never treat her so carefully. And Imo Wushang seemed to be cold and emotionless, but under his stern face, there was a side of him that touched her the most. She liked fireflies, even if she was not willing to admit it. She had never said it to anyone. Sometimes she imagined that she was like a firefly, small and insignificant in this world. But freedom. She had no freedom since she was a child. She lived in a small cage. She had never eaten good food, and she had never seen the big world. In her world, there was only her own small deserted courtyard, a dilapidated courtyard, and a considerate servant girl. Not only that, she had to bear the daily cold eyes and inhuman torture and abuse. When she was 15 years old, she married the man she loved the most. He protected her very well, indeed very well, and treated her very gently. She had merely changed a small dilapidated courtyard into a big house. She could eat well, dress well, and even have a few more servants. But she still hadn't gone out. The prince's mansion was a cage that imprisoned her. After entering the palace, the cage became bigger. She didn't know what the outside world was like. It seemed like there was only Feng Juqing in her world. And then, Feng Juqing no longer wanted her. She held out her hand, and the little firefly flew towards her and landed on her palm. Fireflies are alive. There is a scorching temperature around them. The Prince Regent is very good to me, but sometimes it makes me feel unreal. Looking at the firefly in her palm, Xin Yueji could not help but sigh. Ignoring the stiff man beside her, she chuckled. Soon, her hand was in the man's palm. She looked up and met the man's pitch-black eyes. Without giving the man a chance to speak, she smiled. However, I don't hate this feeling. Chapter 177. The small fireflies were not as big and easy to control as animals. In order to train this batch of fireflies, he had put in a lot of effort, and many died during this period. Fireflies were not difficult to catch, but catching so many at once was like looking for a needle in a haystack. For her, he really left everything, just to make her happy. As if in this world, in his heart, there was nothing more important than her. From the last loss of anger and jealousy, every time he thought of it, he had a lingering fear. He always thought that Feng Juqing was a gentleman. He promised him that he would not hurt her, and since he said he would do it. He did as he said, and left. In half a month, he conquered half of the country for him, and used it to exchange for Gu Yueqin's conditions. Imo Wushang hugged her tightly in his arms. The pain after losing, the joy and excitement after regaining what had been lost. Imo Wushang just wanted to stay by her side forever and not leave for a moment. He wanted to protect her personally and not let anyone hurt her. Even if she hated him and was tired of him, he only knew that as long as he was by her side, shielding her from the wind and rain, clearing all obstacles for her, and killing all those who hurt her, she would not be hurt. His love for her, perhaps it was really deep to the point of bone marrow. It didn't matter if she had changed her appearance or body. He could always recognize her. He knew the feeling in his heart. It was all the throbbing and the sense of familiarity and protection from the bottom of his heart when he faced her. No matter what you like, I will search the world for it and find it for you. As long as she could smile at him, the sacrifice, everything, for him, was worth it. Strange, in the middle of the night, why are there so many fireflies flying in the imperial garden? At this time, a man's voice came from below. Hearing this voice, Shun Yueji withdrew her gaze from the man. Her dark eyes were covered with a layer of frost. Imo Wushang's sharp lips were pursed into a straight line, revealing his master's mood at the moment. It was time to order people to patrol around and sweep away all the obstacles when he and Jier were alone. Don't touch me. Another sharp voice rang out, but it was deliberately suppressed. As soon as she heard this familiar voice, Shin Yueji was shocked. Almost immediately, he recognized the owner of the voice. Little hussy, I don't know why you were crying under me when you were asking me to do something for you. What's the matter? I've already done something for you, and now you're turning your back on me? In the imperial garden, the figures of a man and a woman arguing were elongated by the light from the fireflies. Lu Qingrou's delicate and beautiful face had a sickly pale complexion. She was dressed in white, and her delicate body was so thin that it looked like it could collapse at any moment. Shin Yueji still remembered that Lu Qingrou's beauty had once stunned her with a single glance. She still remembered that when she first saw her, she was dazed for a long time by Lu Qingrou's sickly beauty. How could there be such a beautiful woman in this world? Her beauty caused people to involuntarily feel pity for her. The difference between her and Gu Yuan was that her gentleness was somewhat fake, while Lu Qingrou was truly sickly. Wasn't Lu Qingrou supposed to be in the cold palace? How did she get out? Chapter 178. Under the dim light, Lu Qingrou's pale face was even more lovable, but at this moment, there was a layer of coldness in her eyes that was colder than ice. This is the Imperial Garden. I don't want to be fucked by you in a place like the Imperial Garden. The woman's cold and explicit words made Shin Yueji look at her a few more times. Her impression of Lu Qingrou was not like this. She was gentle, considerate, and always treated her with an endless supply of soft words and soft words. Her watery eyes seemed to be able to speak, and her favorite thing to do was to hold her hand and talk to her. But the current Lu Qingrou, she could not feel the warmth in the depths of her eyes. Her pale face was covered with a layer of frost, and the words that came out of her crimson lips were no longer as gentle and soft as before. Instead, they were filled with sharpness. Beside her stood an ordinary-looking man in eunuch uniform. His body was slightly bent, and he looked a little hunched. He looked ordinary, and his skin was yellow. Shin Yueji stared at the man seriously for a moment. It was fake. This man had changed his appearance. He was not from the palace. The Imperial Garden is more exciting. Who would come to the Imperial Garden in the middle of the night? I don't know how many men have entered your Huayang Palace. You've probably used all the places, right? I don't want to use the places those men have used. As he spoke, the man reached out and touched Lu Qingrou's smooth face, a pair of dark eyes filled with lust, and scrupulously sweeping across her chest. Lu Qingrou did not dodge, but her charming face became colder and colder. Her sharp eyes were filled with pain and indifference after struggling. The man took the opportunity to push her down into a pile of grass, just enough to cover their bodies. Don't worry, my ears are sensitive. I can even hear a bird flying past. If someone comes, I will definitely notice. At this moment, the two people on the roof. Shin Yueji turned back to look at the man beside her. They were on the roof, and one below. Not far from here, right? The man's handsome face showed an indifferent expression. Shin Yueji was no longer suspicious. It should be Mo Wushang's trick. Seeing the man so confident, his martial arts must be extremely high. The dense flowers and grass covered their bodies. Even though they were high up, they could not see through the flowers and see the people inside. Shin Yueji's heart was filled with mixed feelings. Lu Qingrou could be considered as a ray of light in her dark and helpless days. If Feng Jiuqing was her everything, then Lu Qingrou was the most unforgettable light in the depths of her heart. She had always thought that Lu Qingrou was noble and elegant. Sometimes, he also felt that she was ignorant of the ways of the world, pure like a piece of white paper. But now, looks like you've been living well these days. There are quite a lot of marks left on your body by those men. Lu Qingrou, is it worth it? The man's dark eyes were locked on her delicate collarbone. There were rows of uneven love bites everywhere. Some were deep, some were shallow, and none were missed. Lu Qingrou just closed her eyes and did not speak. The man sneered and licked her white neck fiercely. Is it worth it to receive so many men you don't like for a dead person who has been dead for so long? Chapter 179. Lu Qingrou's thin body trembled vigorously. She opened her eyes, her long eyelashes trembled, and her gem-like eyes shot out a cold light. Remember the relationship between us. The man sneered, no longer talking nonsense, and focused on taking from her body. Her nails dug deep into the soil. Lu Qingrou closed her eyes, feeling the humiliation coming from her body. After dawn, you are responsible for spreading what happened in the palace these days, the more the better. The man kissed her lips passionately, noticed her avoidance, and smiled sinisterly. You should have the attitude to ask for help. After all, this is the palace. The emperor is not a fool. Hearing this, Lu Qingrou stopped moving. The man kissed her delicate lips as he wished, and sucked hard a few times. No wonder those people in the pugilistic world work hard for you. Little bitch, you are really a poison. The more people eat, the more addicted they become. Even I fell because of you. On the roof, listening to the man's low words, the thin sweat on Shun Yueji's palms slowly dissipated, leaving only a layer of coldness. She understood the man's words even if she was a fool. The dead person he was talking about was her. Lu Qingru once plotted a rebellion for her, assassinated the empress, and lost the whole family's life. Her relatives, unlike her father and mother, all loved her, and Lu Qingru had a deep relationship with them. When they learned that Lu Qingru had an accident, they used the lives of the whole family in exchange for Lu Qingru's safety. Two-headed monster. It turned out that in addition to the two-headed monster, there were many people who worked for her. She had been thinking. She understood Lu Qingru's identity. They knew each other very early. Her character, her identity. After the Lu family was gone, she was a weak woman in the harem who had no one to rely on, and it was extremely difficult for her to survive. How did she control the two-headed monster to work for her? Now, the doubts that lingered in Shun Yueji's heart were finally solved. She used her own body in exchange for those men to work for her. People in the pugilistic world. All kinds of strange, ruthless methods. There was no lack of ugly and despicable people. Her eyes were locked on the two people in the flowers, the swaying grass. Except for the man's disgusting roar, she did not make any movement, as if she was a dead person. It was humiliating. In her heart, she also knew that it was humiliating. Qingru. He muttered the name in his heart. You actually sacrificed so much for me. Is it really worth it? Our relationship is just a playmate. I'm already dead. You've sacrificed your whole family's lives and your innocence for a dead man. You've sacrificed so much for me, but I've never given you anything. Why are you so good to me? She wanted to go down. She wanted to rush up. She wanted to tear the man on top of her into pieces. But she knew she couldn't. Even the man beside her seemed to know she was going to do this and didn't give her a chance to move at all. So what if he rushed down? What had happened was a foregone conclusion. The Lu family was gone, and her body had been bullied by countless men. Did she rush down to kill that man? Or should he tell her who he was? She had sacrificed so much for her, and now that she had seen the worst side of her, how would she feel? Shin Yueji sat there for a long time. After the man was done, he helped Lu Qingru put on her clothes and carried her out of the bushes. Chapter 180. She saw a flash of disgust in Lu Qingru's eyes and struggled to get out of the man's arms. She limped away alone. Remember what you promised me. The man looked at her leaving figure and couldn't help but scold. Bah, little bitch, going back alone. It seems that there is a new man in Huayang Palace. After the man finished scolding, he also disappeared in a flash. The imperial garden returned to its previous silence, as if what happened just now was just a small interlude. Shin Yueji's heart couldn't calm down for a long time. She had no time to appreciate those glowing fireflies, but stared at the direction in which Lu Qingru left, until her thin figure slowly disappeared at the end of the corner. Did you know it from the beginning? The man didn't speak. Shin Yueji smiled. She knew it from looking at him, but she shouldn't blame him, shouldn't ask why he didn't stop her. Because her identity didn't allow it. Because Lu Qingru had nothing to do with him. He had always been a cold person. Help me find a person. Okay. If it's useless, help me kill him. Mo Wushang's black eyes were calm, and his thin lips opened slightly. Okay. After returning to Fengqi Palace, Shin Yueji's mind was full of Lu Qingru, thinking of their past, thinking of the little things they had together. Later, she thought of the 3 days after she entered the palace, her persuasion, comfort, and protection. She thought of the first day she entered the palace. A concubine came to find trouble with her and offered her a cup of tea. Although there was no poison in it, there was a fierce medicine that could cause abdominal pain for 6 hours. She saw the clues and knew that she didn't want to cause trouble in the harem and make things difficult for Feng Jiuqing. So she drank the cup of tea for her. She was in so much pain in Huayang Palace that she wanted to die, clutching her stomach and rolling on the bed. Her white forehead was full of cold sweat. She endured it alone. She rushed to her. She fell into her arms, endured the pain, smiled at her weak body, and said, "Fortunately, it wasn't you." That night, she said a lot of things to her. She said she protected her. She came to protect her. She asked her why she did it. It was just a cup of tea. She could drink it herself. She said that she didn't want her to suffer any harm. Not to mention tea, even if it was poison, as long as it was related to her, she would drink it without hesitation. My head hurts. At the same time, waves of pain could be felt from his heart. Shin Yueji leaned into the man's arms. Everything in the perching Phoenix Palace was dark. The candles had all been extinguished. Only the man's beating heart and warm embrace could bring her back to reality. "I know you're powerful in the Feng Nation, and you're on par with Feng Juqing. Can you promise me one thing?" She grabbed the man's collar and didn't give him a chance to refuse. "Help me protect her secretly, okay?" The man didn't stay silent for long. He wrapped her hand in his palm and kissed it gently. "Okay, Imo Wushang, aren't you going to ask me why?" The person who had a good relationship with Lu Qingru was Gu Yueqin, not Shin Yueji. The Shin Yueji in everyone's eyes had nothing to do with Lu Qingru. Even if they saw her tonight, she was just a stranger. But she couldn't even take care of the people in the harem, so how could she take care of others? The man's dark eyes flashed, and he patted her back to comfort her. "Sleep." Chapter 181. After she fell asleep, the man stared at her delicate and pretty face for a while, then tucked her in and carefully got up to leave. Inside Huayang Palace, after soaking in the bathtub for nearly 4 hours, Lu Qingru put on her clothes and sat in front of the dressing mirror. Hearing the noise outside and feeling the familiar cold aura approaching, she smiled slightly and waved her hand to dismiss the only servant girl in the main hall. "I didn't expect that this palace's small Huayang Palace could attract such a great Buddha like the Prince Regent." Not getting a response from the man, Lu Qingru smiled instead, and there was more sarcasm in her smile. She looked at the handsome man behind her through the bronze mirror. When Qin was alive, the Prince Regent was devoted to her, and his feelings were as deep as the sea, but he couldn't get a response. After Qin's death, you were depressed and blamed yourself, so you locked yourself in the Prince Regent's residence and didn't participate in anything. This palace always thought that you were a man who was wholeheartedly devoted to Qin. The sarcasm in her eyes became stronger and stronger. Qin's corpse hasn't even turned cold, but you already had an affair with that new imperial consort Shun. You stayed in that woman's palace day and night, not willing to leave even for a moment. You men are really flowery with flowery words. Imo Wushang, since you are not wholeheartedly devoted to Qin, why did you come to provoke her?" Lu Qingru suddenly got up from the round chair, and her slender white fingers slammed the table in front of her, making an ear-piercing sound. The jewelry placed on the table fell to the ground. Although this Huayang Palace was a cold palace, her title as one of the 4 concubines was still there, and all the food and clothing here were still there. Other than the servant girls and eunuchs who were driven out by her, Feng Juqing's treatment towards her could be considered as giving face to the Lu family. Imo Wushang looked at her indifferently. His dark eyes were as calm as a pool of stagnant water. But it was this look of his that completely angered Lu Qingru. "Do you know?" She suddenly roared at him, her huge eyeballs rolling down from the corner of her eyes. Her body trembled, and her pale face was filled with vicious disgust and hatred. "Imo Wushang, do you know how helpless she was that day? Why did you leave? Why did you leave her when she was most helpless? You keep saying that you love her, that you care about her, that you don't care about this country, that you can give up everything for her. But why did you leave that day?" Lu Qingru's voice trembled as she recalled the scene of that day. Her heart was torn apart by waves of pain. She clutched at her heart and cried out loud, "Sometimes, I wish I was a man who held military power and could rebel for her sake. I wanted to save her, but at the cost of my whole family's lives. I realized that I still couldn't save her. I went to beg that man, but that man was really heartless. One day after another, I knocked my head on the ground until it broke my skin and bled, but he didn't let go. To me, a day has passed so quickly, so quickly. One was a man who had been deeply in love with her for 9 years, The other was a man who loved her and was willing to give up everything for her. But in the end, he forced her to her death. In her most helpless moment, one was the man who personally sentenced her to death. The other, who could have saved her, had disappeared. Lu Qingru felt like she was about to go crazy. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.